The grief counselor's office always smelled like lavender and old books, and I used to find that comforting. That Thursday afternoon in November, I was sitting in the parking lot for 10 minutes after my session ended, just breathing, the way Dr. Holloway had taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let the feelings move through you like water, not like stone. I had been doing that a lot in the 3 months since we lost Noah. I almost didn't check my phone before pulling out of the parking lot. I almost just drove home on autopilot, the way I'd been doing most things lately: grocery shopping, making coffee, showing up for my nursing shifts with a smile so practiced. It had started to feel like a physical object I put on in the morning and hung back on the hook at night. But something made me glance at the screen, and there was a text from my neighbor, Linda, sent 22 minutes earlier. Claire, I hope I'm not overstepping, but there's a moving truck in your driveway, and I saw your mother-in-law going in through the front door. I thought you should know. Are you okay? I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because the words weren't quite making sense, the way words stop making sense when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are showing it. I put the car in drive. The drive home is 11 minutes on a normal day. I made it in 7. I don't remember most of it. I remember the yellow leaves on the oak trees along Birchwood Avenue, and I remember that the radio was playing something I didn't recognize, and I remember my hands being very steady on the wheel in a way that felt wrong. Too calm, the stillness before something breaks. I turned onto our street and saw the truck first. White, generic, the kind you rent by the day. It was parked halfway up the driveway, and the back was open. 2 men in gray t-shirts were carrying something down the front porch steps, and it took me a full 3 seconds to understand what I was looking at. It was the crib, Noah's crib, the one Daniel and I had spent 6 weeks researching, the one I'd driven 40 minutes to pick up from a specialty shop in Asheville, because the finish was exactly the right shade of white, and the slats were exactly the right width, and I had been so careful about every single detail, because I was going to be careful about everything this time. The one that still had the mobile of hand-painted stars hanging above it. The one I had stood next to every night for the last 4 months of my pregnancy. One hand resting on the rail, whispering things I thought no one could hear. The men were loading it into the back of the truck. I parked on the street. I'm not entirely sure how I walked up to the porch without my legs giving out, but I did. And through the open front door, I could hear voices: my mother-in-law Patricia's voice, high and efficient and pleased with itself, the way it always was when she had decided she was doing someone a favor, and the lower murmur of my sister-in-law Melissa's voice, agreeing with everything, the way Melissa always did. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. One of the movers looked up and saw me. Something in my face must have read clearly enough, because he actually took a small step backward. I walked past him into my own house. Patricia was standing in the middle of what had been Noah's room with a clipboard. An actual clipboard. As if she had planned this out. As if this was a project with a checklist, and Melissa was kneeling next to a cardboard box, wrapping the small ceramic elephant from the bookshelf in newspaper. The elephant I had bought at a craft fair when I was 22 weeks along. The elephant I had showed Daniel on a video call because he'd been traveling for work and I'd wanted to share every small thing with him. He had laughed and said any child of ours would obviously need a ceramic elephant. And I had laughed too, standing in the middle of a crowded fair, with a hand on my stomach and something so full and bright in my chest, I hadn't known what to do with it. Melissa looked up first. Her face did something complicated: guilt. Then the quick replacement of guilt, with a kind of breezy defensiveness. Claire, we were going to call you. Where is my husband? I said. My voice came out completely level. That surprised me more than anything. Patricia turned. She was wearing her good coat, the navy one she saved for occasions she considered important, and she had the look she always got when she had decided that she was the most reasonable person in the room, and everyone else simply hadn't caught up yet. She had that look a lot, in my experience. Claire, she said, and her tone was the particular kind of warm that isn't warm at all, the kind that's really just condescension wearing a cardigan. I'm so glad you're here. I was going to explain all of this to you properly tonight, but this actually works out better. I want you to understand that this comes from a place of love. Where is Daniel? He's at work, as you know. She glanced at the clipboard. I used the key he gave me back in the spring, when you two went to Savannah. I still had it, and I thought, well, we're all family, so, what are you doing in Noah's room? The silence that followed was only about 3 seconds long, but it had a specific texture to it. Melissa stopped wrapping the elephant. One of the movers appeared in the doorway behind me, holding a box, and then apparently decided this was not his situation and backed away again. Patricia set her clipboard on what used to be the changing table, which, I noticed, had already been disassembled and was leaning against the wall in pieces, and she gave me the look. The look that said she was about to explain something simple to someone who was making it more complicated than it needed to be. "Claire, it's been 3 months," she said. "I know how hard that is. I do. But you and Daniel need to start moving forward, and keeping this room exactly the way it was isn't helping either of you. It's not healthy. It's like a—" She paused, and I saw her select the word deliberately. "A shrine. You've turned it into a shrine, and that's not what this space should be." Melissa made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been the effort of pretending not to exist. "Melissa is due in February," Patricia continued, "and she and Brandon don't have a single piece of furniture yet, because, well, you know how their situation is. And I thought these beautiful things are just sitting here, not being used, and why shouldn't they go to a baby who's actually coming home? It's practical. It's what made sense." I looked at my mother-in-law for a long moment. I had known Patricia for 6 years. I had watched her, in those 6 years, find very creative ways to make it clear that she considered me an impermanent fixture in her son's life. I had been previously married briefly, disastrously, at 24, a fact that Patricia had never technically mentioned, but had always somehow managed to reference through absence, through the slight pause before she said the word family when I was in the room. When Daniel and I got pregnant with Noah, she had responded to the news with a smile that was almost right and a comment about how she hoped everything would work out this time. When we lost him, she had brought a casserole. She had said she was sorry, and then, 3 weeks later, she had mentioned over Sunday dinner that Daniel had always been meant for bigger things, and wasn't it possible that everything happened for a reason? And I had excused myself and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could trust myself to go back inside. That had been the last Sunday dinner I attended. "Melissa," I said, "could you please give us a minute?" Melissa was already standing up. She set the ceramic elephant down on the box, not inside it, just on top of it, as if even that much was now too much, and she left without making eye contact. I turned back to Patricia. "I want to understand something," I said. "You came into my home, without asking me, without telling me, while you knew I was at a therapy appointment, and you are in the process of removing things from a room that belongs to my son." Patricia opened her mouth. "Noah," I said. "His name was Noah, not your situation, not everything. Noah Daniel Hargrove, born still at 31 weeks on August the 14th, and I was with him for 6 hours before they took him, and I have not had a single full night's sleep since, and this." I stopped. I breathed, in through the nose. "This room is the one place in this house where I can stand and feel like he existed. And you came in here with a clipboard." Something shifted in Patricia's face. Not quite guilt. Patricia was not, in my experience, particularly fluent in guilt, but something adjacent to it. A brief awareness that she might have miscalculated. Then it was gone. "You can't keep living in grief forever," she said, and her voice had hardened slightly. The warm cardigan tone replaced with something that fit her better. "And honestly, Claire, I will say what Daniel won't say to you directly, because he's too soft-hearted. This is not good for him either. He needs to move on. He needs to be free too." "Did Daniel ask you to do this?" "Not in so many words, but did he ask you to do this?" The pause was answer enough. "Then I need you to stop," I said. "Right now. I need those men to stop." Patricia lifted her chin. "Claire, I really think if you just take a breath." "I own this house," I said. She blanked. "My name is the only name on the deed," I said. "I bought it in 2019. 2 years before Daniel and I got married, and we discussed putting his name on it, and we decided we would get around to it, and we haven't. Which means you let yourself into my house with a key. My husband gave you without my knowledge, and you are in the process of removing my belongings, with a moving truck and a clipboard." I watched her recalibrate. It was, in its own awful way, interesting to observe. Patricia was a woman who operated through the certainty that she was always, in the end, going to be justified. That certainty was the scaffolding everything else rested on, and I could see it now, making small adjustments, looking for the angle. "I'm sure Daniel would have." "Patricia." I kept my voice very even. I'm going to go outside and ask those men to bring everything back in. And then I'm going to ask them to leave. And then I need you and Melissa to leave as well. And I need you to give me back the key. This is completely. I'd also like to let you know, I said, that I'm 10 weeks pregnant. The room went quiet in a different way. Patricia stared at me. Melissa, who had apparently not gone far, appeared back in the doorway with an expression I couldn't quite parse. The OB confirmed it Monday, I said. Everything looks healthy. I wasn't going to say anything for another few weeks, but since you are currently disassembling my son's room to give the furniture to someone else's baby, I thought it was relevant context. I need this room. I need everything in it. I need it exactly where it is. Patricia said nothing. For perhaps the first time in all 6 years I had known her, Patricia had nothing to say. The key, I said, and held out my hand. She opened her purse. She placed the key in my palm. She didn't look at me when she did it. I went outside. I talked to the movers. They were actually very kind about it. And one of them told me in a low voice that he had thought something seemed off about the whole situation, and he was sorry for my loss, and I thanked him and meant it fully. They brought the crib back in, the changing table, the boxes of small, carefully chosen things. They left. I stood on the porch and watched the truck back out of my driveway, and something inside me that had been wound extremely tight for the last 40 minutes began, very slowly, to loosen. Melissa left without speaking to me. She walked to her car with her shoulders curved inward and didn't look back. Patricia walked out last. She stood on the porch for a moment, and I thought she was going to say something, a final recalibration, a fresh angle, some version of you'll understand someday, but she didn't. She looked at me with something that was either the beginning of shame or simply the face of a woman who was already composing the version of this story she would tell later, where she was the reasonable one, and then she walked to her car, and she drove away. I called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. He was still at work. I could hear the office sounds behind him, and he said hey in the distracted way he did when he was in the middle of something, and then I said, I need you to come home, and something in my voice must have changed the whole quality of the moment, because he said I'm leaving right now without asking a single question. I sat on the porch steps and waited. The afternoon light was doing something specific with the oak tree in the front yard, that particular late autumn gold that makes everything look like the last page of a book. And the street was very quiet. Linda from next door came to her window once and looked out, and I raised my hand and she nodded and went back to whatever she was doing. I was grateful she didn't come over. I wasn't ready for kindness yet. Kindness would have undone me, and I wasn't ready to be undone. Daniel's car turned onto the street 28 minutes after I called him. He parked in the driveway in the space that 2 hours ago had held a rented moving truck, and he got out and he was still in his work clothes, his jacket on, his tie loosened the way he did it in the car on the drive home, and he looked at my face and sat down on the porch step next to me without saying anything. I told him everything. I told him about Linda's text, and the truck, and the crib being carried out by 2 strangers in gray t-shirts, and Patricia, with her clipboard and her navy coat and her certainty. I told him about the ceramic elephant and the disassembled changing table, and the word shrine, and what it had felt like to hear that word applied to the room where I had spent so many hours, standing in the dark with my hand on the word, rail, talking to a child who was never going to hear me. Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment after I finished. He was looking at the yard, at the oak tree, at something I couldn't see. Then he said, she still had that key? You gave it to her when we went to Savannah. That was 18 months ago. I know. He was quiet again. I have learned, in 6 years, to read the different qualities of Daniel's silences. This one was the kind that preceded a decision, a final, unreopenable decision. I had only seen this silence a handful of times, and every time it appeared, whatever it decided, stayed decided. I'll call a locksmith tomorrow, he said. New locks on every door. Okay. And I'll talk to her. He paused. I mean, I'll really talk to her. Not the kind of talking we've been doing for the last 3 months, where I let things go because I thought she was grieving too and needed grace. Another pause. She doesn't get to grieve my son as a reason to do things like this. That's not how that works. No, I said. It isn't. He turned and looked at me then, really looked at me, the way he had learned to look at me in the months since August, carefully, fully, without flinching away from whatever he found. You said she was taking it from Melissa. She said Melissa needed furniture. He shook his head, slow, Once. Melissa has a nursery full of stuff. We saw it at Christmas. Mom bought half of it herself. He looked back at the yard. It wasn't about the furniture. I had known that. But hearing him say it, hearing him name it clearly, without hedging, without the careful diplomatic softening he usually applied to things involving his mother, settled something in me. I'm going to tell you something, I said. He looked at me. I'm 10 weeks pregnant. The expression that crossed Daniel's face was the most unguarded thing I had seen in months. Not just surprise, though, that was there, but something that opened up behind the surprise like a room you didn't know the house contained. Something careful and enormous and very, very tender. Monday, I said. Dr. Peterson confirmed it. Everything looks good. I was waiting for 12 weeks before I said anything to anyone. But I told your mother today because she was standing in Noah's room with a moving truck in the driveway, and it seemed like relevant information. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite anything else. He put his arm around me and I leaned into him, and we sat on the porch steps in the late afternoon light without speaking for a long time. And the oak tree did its thing with the gold, and the street stayed quiet, and somewhere down the block, someone was raking leaves, and the sound of it was very ordinary and very peaceful. She's going to want to come back, I said. She's going to call, and she's going to have a whole version of today that makes sense to her, and she's going to want to talk about it. Let her call, Daniel said. I'll answer. I need her to understand that this isn't negotiable. Not just the room. All of it. The way she talks about Noah. The way she didn't. I stopped. Started again. He was your son. He was my son. He was real, and he was here, and he mattered. And I need her to understand that there is no version of moving forward that involves pretending he wasn't. She'll understand it, Daniel said. Or she won't be in our lives. That's it. That's the whole thing. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said things when he meant them completely. I believed him. That evening, after Daniel had made phone calls I didn't listen to and heated up soup I ate without tasting, we went into Noah's room together. The movers had put most things back, though not exactly where they had been. The crib was a foot to the left. The shelf with the ceramic elephant and the other small careful things was slightly askew. We straightened it. We hung the mobile of hand-painted stars back above the crib. It took us about 20 minutes, working quietly, and when it was done, we stood in the doorway together and looked at the room in the low light. It was still Noah's room. It was still everything we had chosen for him. Every detail we had agonized over, every small object that had been purchased with the specific knowledge that there was a specific person coming to live among these things and be shaped by them, and grow up surrounded by the evidence that he had been wanted long before he arrived. I keep thinking about how much he would have loved that elephant, I said. Daniel laughed. A real one this time, surprised out of him. The elephant was a lot. It was the perfect amount. It was so much, Claire. He would have carried it everywhere. It would have gone in the bathtub. The ceramic elephant that cost $40 would have gone in the bathtub. Absolutely. We stood there a little longer. The mobile turned very slowly in the air from the heating vent, the painted stars moving in their small circle. And I thought about Noah the way I had learned to think about him, not around the edges, carefully, the way you approach something that might shatter you, but directly. Squarely. He had been here. He had been real. His name was Noah Daniel Hargrove, and he had been born still on August the 14th, and I had held him for 6 hours, and he had been the most entirely himself person I had ever seen in my life. Even then, even in those hours, and nothing that happened afterward, not grief, not time, not a mother-in-law, with a clipboard, and a key she should have returned months ago. Nothing was going to undo the fact that he had existed. Daniel put his hand on my stomach, very lightly, the way he had learned to do with Noah, and was learning to do again now. Hi, he said quietly, to whoever was listening. The next morning, I called a locksmith. Daniel called his mother. I don't know exactly what he said to her because I was in the backyard with a cup of coffee, and I didn't need to hear it. I had already said what I needed to say. What I know is that the conversation lasted 45 minutes, and when it was over, Daniel came outside and stood with me for a while without speaking, and then he said that his mother had a lot of thinking to do, and that he had made certain things very clear, and that he would wait and see what she chose to do with that. I nodded. That was enough. The locksmith came at noon. New deadbolts on the front door, the back door, the side entry by the garage. I held the new keys in my hand before I gave one to Daniel, and I thought about Linda's text, and about the specific nausea of pulling into my own street and seeing a rented truck in my driveway. I thought about the mover who had stepped backward when he saw my face, and about the other one who had said he was sorry for my loss, in a voice that was entirely genuine, and about Melissa and the ceramic elephant sitting on top of a cardboard box while she tried to avoid looking at me. I kept one key. I gave Daniel one key. That was all. In the weeks that followed, several things happened in the order that things happen when a life is rearranging itself. Patricia called twice and didn't leave messages. She sent a card handwritten, which was more than I had expected, that said she was sorry, and that she had been wrong, and that she hoped, in time, I would be willing to talk. I put the card in the kitchen drawer where I put things I wasn't ready to deal with yet. Daniel replied to her, on my behalf, briefly, and told her that we would be in touch when we were ready and not before. Melissa texted me 6 days after the incident. The text said, "I should have said something when she first told me the plan. I knew it wasn't right. I'm sorry, Claire." I sat with that text for a long time. Melissa had always been easier than Patricia, younger, less certain, more capable of the occasional honest moment. I wrote back, "I appreciate that. Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. But it was a door left open, a crack, which was the most I could manage. Noah's room stayed Noah's room. We didn't redecorate it or repaint it or change anything. But we also started using it differently, sitting in the glider in the evening, sometimes reading, or just being in the space. It stopped feeling like a room I was protecting and started feeling like a room I was living in. There's a difference, though it took me a while to find the words for it. Protecting something means holding it against the world. Living in something means letting the world and the thing coexist. In January, Dr. Peterson confirmed that everything was still looking good, and we told our families, and the response from Daniel's side was careful and calibrated in a way that told me the word had already gotten around. Patricia sent flowers, not to the house, to my office at the hospital, a fact which suggested that some part of her understood she had not yet earned the right to a direct gesture. I looked at the flowers for a long time before I put them in the break room for everyone to enjoy. I kept my grief counseling appointments with Dr. Holloway every Thursday afternoon. I kept driving home on autopilot sometimes, kept waking at 3 in the morning and lying in the dark doing the breathing. Some mornings were still very hard. Some evenings, I sat in Noah's room and cried, and didn't try to do the breathing at all. Just let the water move through. Dr. Holloway said that was good, too. She said, grief doesn't resolve so much as it integrates. It becomes part of the architecture rather than the emergency, and you learn to live in a house that's been changed by it rather than waiting for it to be the house it was before. Noah's room, our Noah's room, the one with the crib that had been carried out and carried back in and reassembled by my husband on a November afternoon, with the mobile of painted stars, that room became part of the architecture too. A promise, we called it sometimes, when we talked about it. Not a shrine, not a memorial. A promise. The first time I stood in the doorway of that room and looked at the crib and the elephant and the slowly turning stars, and felt something that had light in it along with the grief, actually felt it, not just knew intellectually that it should be possible, was a Tuesday evening in late February, about a week before Melissa's daughter was born. Daniel was standing behind me with his chin resting on the top of my head, and the room was exactly as we had left it. And I thought about Noah the way I always thought about him, directly and squarely, and then I thought about whoever was coming next, whoever this new person was going to be. And I understood something I had been working toward without knowing it. Love doesn't have a fixed capacity. It doesn't run out when it has to hold more than one person, more than one grief, more than one beginning. It expands. It makes room. It stands in the doorway of a room that holds both a child who isn't here anymore and a child who isn't here yet. And it holds both of them without choosing, without ranking, without deciding which one is more real or which one deserves more space. Noah was real. He was real in every hour I carried him, and every choice I made for him, and every small, careful thing I chose, because there was a specific person coming to inhabit a specific life, and I wanted that life to be beautiful. He was real in the 6 hours I held him, and in the ceramic elephant that cost $40 and would have absolutely gone in the bathtub. And he was real in the room we refused to surrender. He was real in the way his father touched the doorframe every time he walked past, just briefly, the way you greet someone. He was real in the way I still, sometimes, whispered things I thought no one could hear, And whoever was coming next, whoever was going to lie in that crib and eventually grab at those stars and grow up knowing that they came to a family that understood loss and understood love as the same ongoing act they were going to know about their brother, not as a weight, not as a shadow, as a person who had been here, who had been loved, who had made room in us for more love than we'd known we were capable of. A promise. Not to the past, but from it. That was what the room was. That was what it had always been.